Let me bring in my next guest. I got Amy Gardner. She's a national political reporter at the Washington Post, and she's kind enough to give us a few minutes. And Amy, we've seen where the numbers are going in Florida. Is that kind of a fait accompli? It's gonna, at the end of the day, it's gonna go red?
I mean, it's what I can say is that President Trump has already won more votes than he did in 2016 by a lot. So, I mean, the writing appears to be on the wall. I'm not going to call Florida for you, but I do have one observation about Florida, which is that remember what happened in 2018, where the Democrats were disappointed in Florida. They lost the governor's race and the Senate race. And then, and it was alarming, and it was early in the evening. And then the rest of the country did what it did, right? The Democrats won back the House. There was a tidal wave across the country. And so I think that Florida is Florida, and the night is young.
It looks at least very prematurely, Amy, but when you look at Ohio early, to a degree, some of the Pennsylvania numbers, the Michigan numbers, that there seems to be, at least if you're Biden and you're looking at some of the earlier returns, he's done a better job positioning himself in the Rust Belt, certainly, than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago.
I agree completely. I think Ohio is a great barometer of how Biden is potentially a great barometer of how Biden is going to perform in the Rust Belt, which is where Hillary Clinton lost, as we all know, 4 years ago. And it's not just that he's doing well in early returns, it's that he's doing well in places that President Trump won 4 years ago. Delaware County, just above Columbus, Youngstown. These are places that Trump was incredibly strong 4 years ago. And if Ohio is a barometer for the Rust Belt states, then that's very good news for Biden in Western Pennsylvania and, of course, Michigan and Wisconsin.
It's early, and I understand in Georgia, a lot of Fulton or Atlantic County, we haven't gotten a lot of those numbers in yet, but for the states that were on the wish list of Biden, that weren't critical for 270, but at the top of the list, you had Georgia, you had North Carolina, Arizona, they certainly talked about, et cetera. Is there a sense that, they just couldn't close the deal there? There wasn't enough time, or is the night still young?
Georgia's going to be tough. For the Democrats, it's going to be close. And you're right that Biden can still get to 270 without it. There was polling, internal Republican polling in Georgia 2 weeks ago that had Biden winning and that had the state house losing, the Republican-controlled state house losing control. And things got a little better for the Republicans over the last couple of weeks. So Georgia is a tough one to call, and I would say that one could go either way, but Trump has a little bit of advantage just because of the conservative sort of backbone of that state. I actually think that North Carolina is a place where Biden is potentially stronger. Turnout today was not robust. It was okay. President Trump needed huge turnout to surmount the Democratic advantage in the early and mail voting that took place before today in North Carolina. And then a place that you didn't mention, but I think is worth mentioning, is Texas. Biden is holding his own right now in early returns in Texas. And I think what's really important to watch with Texas is how many people voted today. We passed the total number of votes cast in 2016 before Election Day dawned in Texas. It was 9 million 4 years ago, and it was 9 million before we got to today. If Texas approaches 12 million, which is what the Democrats are predicting in total turnout, it's hard to imagine Biden not winning, because it would really just completely upend our understanding of who has been sitting out the elections in the past in that state.
Do you have a sense in your head that, let's say it's not a blowout, but let's say that there is, a 30 or 40 delegate margin at the end of the night for Biden? And I know it's an impossible question to answer because none of us know it, but is there a sense that there's a magic number that the president will acknowledge and that we can have, a coherent transition without the lawsuits and the dragging out and all the strum and drang? And that's a polite way of saying, well, how ugly I think it could get. Do we have an idea if even people in his own party have cautioned, don't go there because we won't go there with you?
I think that there are a couple things that could happen. Lawsuits about the rules and about wholesale throwing out of ballots that for instance, that were cast by voters in Texas who drove up to a drive-through location in Houston are failing. The courts said no. Even conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said no, we're not taking this up. This was something that they did. Voters have already been voting. We're not going to throw out rules that have been established and now that voting has already started. So so by the same token, if President Trump tries to stop counting tonight, as he has threatened to do, I just don't see the courts being sympathetic to that. These are states that have rules in place that were broadcast to the electorate, and I do not foresee the federal courts stepping in and saying we're going to upend those rules now after the fact. What could happen is litigation over how to interpret those rules, which ballots are eligible under those rules, but those types of battles only happen if there's a state where it's close, where it comes to, like Florida in 2000. So if you have a margin like the one that you're describing, and it's definitive in those states, I don't see a path for President Trump to turn that around with legal action of the courts.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope, however it turns out, that we have a transition that we want. But we have Congressman Chris Shays has got a question for you. He can't control himself. Go ahead. Yeah.
You know why? Because don't you think that the Republican legislators who have not criticized the president would be given a golden opportunity, if it's obvious that the president has lost but the president doesn't want to concede, that they would finally say, no way, Mr. President, you lost. We have a tradition, not only a tradition, we have a God-given gift of respecting the voters and acknowledging success and defeat.
Don't you think? Coming from a former Republican congressman saying that, Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that's the point. And I'd be curious to know if you think that's true. Do you think some legislators will not let, Republican legislators will not let the president get away with trying to claim victory when he lost? That's really my question.
I can only tell you about some conversations that I've had. I've had conversations with people who are close to the political operation of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I've also talked to people who are close with the House Majority in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the Republican House Majority. And in both of those, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is the kind of place where these sort of doomsday scenarios have been talked about, where the Republicans could appoint a dueling set of electors to be seated for the December 14th Electoral College vote. These individuals have told me they're not going to do that. They don't want to do that. They don't want to go out on a limb for this president. If he loses, they will be ready to move on. That's what people have told me.
Good. Interesting. Amy, I really appreciate you giving us a few minutes. Thank you so much. Amy Gardner from the Washington Post. Again, thanks. All right, let's get some more numbers in here, Andrew. Andrew Whitman, join us from the election desk here. What do you got?
Don't have any states to call at this point, Rich. Just want to give some updates on some states that are still outstanding. Texas, with about 45% of the vote in, is running 50 to 49 Biden right now. Again, that's about half the vote in. We've got about 60% of the vote in North Carolina that looks to have come early. Biden is leading by 9 with about a 350,000 vote lead. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat, is leading Tom Tillis in the Senate race there, also with about 60% in, leading by about 6 points, so a smaller lead for Cunningham than for Biden. Just over 40% of the votes in Ohio, 55-45 for Biden right now. I was going to give an update on Georgia, but the numbers just shifted, so I want a second to just go through that. And then 2 House races I just want to let people know about. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a QAnon supporter, has won a seat as a Republican in Georgia. And Ronnie Jackson, who was the former physician of Donald Trump as the White House physician, has won a seat in Congress in Texas. Rich?
Oh, the stories we could get into, Andrew. But the thing that jumped out to me, Andrew, I don't know about you, is how North Carolina's looking this early, and also we also mentioned Ohio, but let me backtrack to something we talked about 45 minutes ago. Any reason to think that the numbers in Virginia, I know we thought that was in the Biden column, is that still a foregone conclusion?
I'm not seeing anything otherwise. I'll go back and I'll double check that in just...
Wouldn't you guesstimate that the numbers we were seeing in Virginia were from Southern Virginia, not Northern Virginia?
I don't know the answer to that. I have to go back in and check that. As for the numbers out of North Carolina and Ohio, keep in mind that the early votes reported first in both of those states. Those are both going to be states where you would think just by the registration advantage that the Democrats had in terms of overall early voting that Biden would shoot out to a lead, and then it would appear as though Trump was trying to catch up in both North Carolina and in Ohio.
Yep. And on some of the granular thing, and you know Ohio well, county by county, it looks good for Biden in Ohio.
If I'm the Biden campaign in general, I'm feeling very comfortable right now. And I will point out, I mean, you never know what could happen with Virginia, but I would bet the farm that with the vote count we were seeing, where you were seeing this really big disparate lead for Trump,
is in the southern
this
part,
is
right?
Southern Virginia.
Yeah.
That could not happen with Northern Virginia.
Okay. We got a packed load of callers who've been so great with us tonight. We're going to come back after the break, and we're going to head to the phone lines. We've got more folks joining us as well here tonight, along with Rick Unger and Chris Shays. Thank you for joining us here, election night. In the early stages, but we expect to have some major news here, I'd say, in maybe the next half hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back.